Here are 3 true scary stories from the darkest corners of the internet. Lock your doors, double-check your windows, because not all monsters are under the bed. Story 1. The knocking door on a Friday afternoon. The clock on the classroom wall seemed to mock us, its hands dragging with agonizing slowness, each tick a tiny betrayal of our fervent wish for the weekend. It was Friday, the 7th and final period, and the air in Mr. Miller's calculus class was thick with the drowsy hum of anticipation. Spring break, the very words tasted like freedom, a sweet promise whispered on the warm breath of an almost April afternoon. Most of my friends in other classes were enduring grueling tests, their heads bowed under the weight of equations and impending doom. But not us. Mr. Miller, bless his perpetually laid-back soul, had declared a truce with numbers. He was the kind of teacher who understood the delicate psychology of a Friday afternoon, especially one preceding a week of liberation. His usual attire of a slightly too casual polo shirt and worn khakis seemed to embody the relaxed ethos he fostered. Today, instead of quadratic formulas, our battlefield was Sporkle.com, an online quiz website. We were deep into a brand logo quiz, a futile attempt to retain some semblance of academic engagement, while our minds drifted to beaches and endless sleep. A low murmur of chatter, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the soft clicks of computer mice, filled the room. The scent of stale cafeteria food mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of someone's spring break dreams, creating a bubble of ordinary, predictable comfort. I remembered the exact moment, the exact question my friend, Ethan, a lanky kid with an encyclopedic knowledge of corporate branding, had just confidently called out Adidas as the correct answer. A ripple of satisfaction, a collective sigh of thank goodness. One more down moved through our section of the room, and then the voice. It wasn't a voice we heard often, and certainly not like this. It crackled, distorted, and warbled through the ancient, tinny loudspeaker mounted above the whiteboard. The usual calm, authoritarian tone of Vice Principal Thompson was gone, replaced by a desperate, hurried cadence that sliced through the classroom's jovial atmosphere like a shard of ice. His words, though muffled by static, were chillingly clear. Attention all faculty, this is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. We are going into immediate lockdown. Secure your classrooms. Stay safe. The laughter died first, abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. The soft clicking of mice ceased, leaving an unnerving, hollow silence. My heart gave a violent lurch, a sudden, cold contraction in my chest that sent a wave of icy dread coursing through my veins. Lockdown, not a drill. My mind, still sluggish from the promise of freedom, struggled to process the words, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a mistake, a test gone wrong, a new kind of, drill they hadn't warned us about. But then I saw Mr. Miller. His transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The easy smile that had been on his face a second ago, the one that made him seem more like an older brother than a teacher, evaporated, his eyes, usually crinkling with good humor, widened with pure, unadulterated panic. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping frantically beneath his skin. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. His body language screamed the horror the loudspeaker had only hinted at, in a flurry of movement that was utterly uncharacteristic of him. Mr. Miller sprang from his desk. He practically flew across the room, his hand slapping against the light switch, plunging us into sudden, disorienting darkness. The only light now came from the windows, a dull, overcast gray, making the classroom feel colder, more enclosed. Everyone back corner now. His voice was a strained whisper, hoarse with urgency, an unfamiliar edge of terror that made my blood run cold. My chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor as I pushed it back, a sound that in any other moment would have earned a reprimand, but now only echoed the collective panic. We scrambled, a chaotic swarm of teenagers suddenly stripped of our carefree bravado, our faces mirroring each other's fear. The familiar warmth of the classroom had vanished, replaced by a suffocating chill. I could feel the prickling sensation on my arms as goosebumps erupted. A visceral response to the sudden, stark reality. Every instinct screamed at me that something was deeply, terribly wrong. We huddled together in the furthest corner, a tight knot of terrified bodies, our knees drawn to our chests, our eyes darting around the darkened room, searching for answers in the impenetrable shadows. The silence returned, heavier this time, imbued with a terrible expectation. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, that stole your breath, that made the frantic thumping of your own heart sound like a drumbeat of doom. We were trapped, waiting, and utterly, horrifyingly vulnerable. The spring break fantasy had shattered, replaced by a nightmare that had just begun. The darkness that had swallowed the classroom was not a comforting, familiar night. It was an oppressive, suffocating blanket that pressed in on us, magnifying every internal tremor and every gasping breath. We huddled together in the back corner, a desperate knot of body, knees drawn to chests, heads bowed. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken fear that clung to our skin like a cold sweat. 2 minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the frantic thudding of my own heart against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence. And then, the subtle, terrifying shift, the faint, almost imperceptible hum that usually emanated from the electrical panel at the back of the room, a constant, mundane companion to our lessons, flickered, then died. It wasn't a loud sound, just a cessation, a gentle exhale of power, but in the absolute stillness, it echoed like a thunderclap. The school's main power had been cut. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a drill gone wrong. This wasn't some minor incident. This was real. This was serious. A few more minutes crawled by, each second a tiny, agonizing eternity. My muscles tensed. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, a dark rectangle in the gloom, not expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then, from the distant reaches of the hallway, a sound tore through the silence, shattering any lingering fragments of our composure. It wasn't just a scream, it was a primal, guttural roar, laced with an unnerving mixture of rage and madness. A man's voice, raw and distorted, spewing incomprehensible threats, punctuated by what sounded like a chilling, almost animalistic moan. My entire body stiffened. The sound, distant at first, was slowly, steadily drawing closer. The two girls nearest me, Chloe and another girl named Maya, began to sob, soft, ragged gasps that echoed our collective terror. Their suppressed cries, laced with genuine, unadulterated fear, were far more potent than any single scream, confirming the horror that was rapidly approaching. My own breath hitched, caught somewhere between my throat and lungs. The incoherent screams and growls grew louder, closer, until I could discern individual words. slurred and distorted but terrifyingly clear. "I'll kill all of you, you hear me, all of you." Then came the sickening or metallic clang of lockers being violently slammed, kicked, or torn open. Bangs and scrapes, a symphony of destruction, reverberated through the hallway. Each impact sending a fresh jolt of fear through me. I could picture the scene in my mind's eye, a man, possessed by a demonic fury, tearing through the familiar, once safe corridor. It was in that moment, hearing the sheer, unbridled malice in his voice, that a cold, absolute dread settled deep in my stomach. I truly feared for my life. Mr. Miller, a silent sentinel by the door, quickly raised a trembling hand, his eyes wide and pleading, urging us to absolute silence. We were a frozen tableau of fear, our gazes darting from one terrified face to another, searching for reassurance that simply wasn't there. We looked like trapped animals, paralyzed and waiting. The metallic symphony of destruction abruptly stopped. The hallway was silent for a heart-stopping second. Then the banging resumed, this time much closer, much louder. It was no longer the hollow clang of lockers. It was a brutal, relentless assault on our classroom door. Each furious impact made the thick wooden door vibrate violently in its frame, a shuddering testament to the force behind it. The sound was deafening, the wood groaning and splintering under the assault. Maya, one of the girls who had been quietly sobbing, let out a choked, desperate scream. "No!" Her cry was swallowed instantly by the cacophony of banging and the man's renewed ardor and frantic bellowing. "Open up! Open up!" His voice was a raw, rasping shriek, laced with a terrifying impatience. Now, both Chloe and Maya were crying out loud, their wails of pure terror adding to the suffocating symphony of fear. Time ceased to exist. Every agonizing second felt like an hour, an eternity of that madman pounding at our only fragile barrier, threatening to tear our world apart. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire being rigid with the desperate hope that the door, just for a few more seconds, would hold. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the relentless pounding on our door stopped. A collective, shaky breath was drawn, then held. We heard the man's furious screams recede, his voice fading down the hallway, still raw with a terrifying, unhinged madness. He continued to bellow, his words becoming indistinct echoes until they finally vanished altogether. 10 minutes later, though it felt like half an hour of suspended animation, Vice Principal Thompson's voice returned to the loudspeaker. His usual authority was still tinged with a tremor, a subtle waver that spoke volumes about the terror he, too, had experienced. He explained in clipped, hurried tone that a mentally unstable individual had entered the building, assaulting the woman at the front desk, who had fled screaming. Staff weren't sure if he was armed. This was years before our school could afford proper security systems or surveillance cameras, leaving us tragically vulnerable. A full sweep of the hallways and classrooms had yielded nothing. The man was gone. Vice Principal Thompson instructed teachers to resume classes. But under no circumstances were doors to be unlocked or students allowed to leave. But the true horror, the detail that would forever claw at the edges of my sanity, came later. Whispers, then outright rumors, began to circulate among my peers, confirmed eventually by an anonymous staff member. One of the night janitors, Mr. Henderson, performing his late shift rounds, had found the man. He was asleep, curled up in a dimly lit storage closet near the back of the school. And, according to the chilling accounts, a glint of steel, the unmistakable black handle of a Modst 44 Magnum, was reportedly sticking out of his pocket. Mr. Henderson must have inadvertently woken him, perhaps by opening the closet door. By the time police arrived, responding to the now confirmed threat, the man was gone. No one in my class, as far as I know, has ever learned if he was caught. He simply vanished, swallowed by the anonymity of the world outside. The fear of that day, the echo of that madman's screams, the terrifying knowledge of the weapon he carried, and the chilling ambiguity of his fate has never truly left me. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I still hear the pounding on that door, and I wonder, is he still out there watching, waiting? The question hangs in the air, a cold, unanswered dread. The relentless, earth-shattering pounding on our classroom door felt like an eternity. Each deafening blow was a hammer strike against the thin barrier separating us from pure, unbridled madness. The entire doorframe shuddered violently, protesting with creaks and groans that sounded like the death throes of a tortured beast. Splinters of wood, loosened by the assault, rained down in tiny dots, dark flakes, visible even in the oppressive gloom. The air, already thick with the metallic tang of fear, now carried a faint, acrid scent of stressed wood and dust. My own breath hitched, a ragged, strangled sound caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my rib, a frantic drum trying to break free, and a cold sweat plastered my clothes to my skin. Chloe and Maya, already on the brink, finally broke. Their suppressed sobs erupted into loud, guttural wails, raw expressions of terror that echoed our collective despair. Other kids, their faces pale and streaked with silent tears, simply stared blankly ahead, their minds retreating into the darkest corners of their consciousness. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my knuckles into my teeth, biting back a scream of my own. Every second that door held was a miracle. Every second felt like a stolen moment before the inevitable. Horrific breach. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the pounding ceased. The sudden silence that followed was even more terrifying than the cacophony. A gaping void that left our ears ringing and our minds reeling. We held our breath, frozen in place, listening. After an agonizing beat, we heard the man's furious screams recede, his voice fading slowly down the hallway, still raw with a terrifying, unhinged madness. He continued to bellow, his words becoming indistinct echoes until they finally vanished altogether, leaving only the ringing silence and the ragged breaths of a classroom full of terrified children. The relief that washed over me was a dizzying, sickening wave, immediately followed by the chilling realization that he hadn't just gone, he had simply moved on. To where, to whom? The questions were colder than any fear I'd felt. It must have been 10 minutes later, though in the suspended animation of our terror, it felt like at least half an hour, that Vice Principal Thompson's voice returned to the loudspeaker. His usual authoritative tone was still tinged with a tremor, a subtle waver that spoke volumes about the fear he, too, had experienced. He explained, in clipped, hurried tones, that a mentally unstable individual had entered the building. He had assaulted the woman at the front desk, who had fled screaming, and staff weren't sure if he was armed. My stomach clenched. This was years before our school could afford proper security systems or surveillance cameras, leaving us tragically vulnerable. There were no metal detectors, no secure entry points, just an open invitation for chaos. A full sweep of the hallways and classrooms had yielded nothing. The man was gone, seemingly swallowed by the labyrinthine corridors. Vice Principal Thompson instructed all teachers to resume classes, but under no circumstances were doors to be unlocked or students allowed to leave for any reason. The instruction felt hollow, almost insulting, like telling a flock of sheep to resume grazing after a wolf had just disappeared into the woods. But the true horror, the detail that would forever claw at the edges of my sanity, came later. Whispers, then outright rumors, began to circulate among my peers, confirmed eventually by an anonymous staff member who apparently couldn't hold the chilling secret. One of the night janitors, Mr. Henderson, performing his late shift rounds, had found the man. He was asleep, curled up in a dimly lit storage closet near the back of the school, almost as if he had simply laid down for a nap after his rampage. And, according to the chilling accounts, a glint of steel, the unmistakable black handle of a Bunsenhome Magnum, was reportedly sticking out of his pocket. The image seared itself into my mind, a sleeping madman, armed with a weapon designed for lethal force, hidden in the shadows of our school. Mr. Henderson, likely unaware of the full gravity of the situation, must have inadvertently woken him, perhaps by opening the closet door to begin his cleaning routine. By the time police arrived, responding to the now confirmed armed threat, the man was gone again, vanished into the night like a ghost. No one in my class, as far as I know, has ever learned if he was caught. He simply disappeared, swallowed by the anonymity of the world outside, leaving behind only the chilling echoes of his screams and the indelible mark of terror on our souls. The fear of that day, the raw dread, the terrifying knowledge of the weapon he carried, and the chilling ambiguity of his fate has never truly left me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, in the sudden drop of silence, I still hear the ghost of that pounding on our classroom door, and I wonder, is he still out there watching, waiting? The question hangs in the air, a cold, unanswered dread, forever etched into the fragile piece of my memories. Story 2, Eyes Behind the Glass. The school year was still fresh, barely a month old, when the first chill of October began to creep into the air. It was a day that matched the mood outside, a dull, overcast sky pressed low, spitting a fine, persistent rain that slicked the asphalt and painted the windows with streaks of gray. Inside, however, the first lunch period was a vibrant cacophony, a stark contrast to the dreary weather. Our cafeteria, a cavernous space with high ceilings and linoleum floors, was a roaring beast of adolescent energy. I sat with my usual group of friends, lost in the familiar rhythm of lunchtime. The air hummed with 1,000 conversations, a chaotic symphony of laughter, gossip, and the clatter of plastic trays. The scent of lukewarm tater tots and mystery meatloaf, a smell uniquely school cafeteria, hung heavy, mixing with the sugary sweetness of fruit punch. Eighth graders, towering and boisterous, jostled for position in line, while younger 6th and 7th graders like myself sprawled across tables, trading snacks and complaints about the morning's classes. It was the epitome of mundane school life, predictable and in its own way, comforting. We were invincible, enclosed in our little bubble of youth and routine. Then, the world tilted. It began with a series of sounds, sudden and violently out of place. 4 distinct booms, sharp and concussive, ripped through the usual hum and clang of the cafeteria. Boom! 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 They weren't soft thuds or distant rumbles. These were deep, resonant blasts that seemed to vibrate in my very teeth. My first instinctive thought, clinging desperately to normalcy, was thunder. The sky was gray. It was raining. A storm made sense. My brain, wired for routine, tried to rationalize it, to fit it into the safe, predictable box of everyday phenomena. But even as that thought flickered, a primal alarm blared in the back of my mind. This wasn't just thunder, there was a raw, aggressive edge to it. Something far too close, far too violent. Before I could even voice my thought, a collective gasp swept through the room, quickly escalating into a wave of horrified screams. It started at the far end of the cafeteria, a ripple of terror that surged and expanded, drowning out the previous din. Kids who had been laughing a second ago were now on their feet, faces contorted, eyes wide with a fear I'd never witnessed. The sound wasn't just loud, it was an animalistic chorus of pure, unadulterated panic, transforming the once familiar space into a swirling vortex of hysteria. My initial reaction was a mix of confusion and indignation. Seriously, I thought, my mind still stubbornly trying to deny the gravity of the situation. These kids are such drama queens. It's just thunder. I even felt a flicker of annoyance, thinking they were overreacting, ruining our precious lunch break. But then I saw them. The campus security guards burst through the main doors, not with their usual casual swagger, but with a frantic urgency that sucked the air out of the room. Their faces, usually impassive, were now etched with a grim, tight fear. Their eyes, darting across the room, then were wide and commanding, cutting through the chaos with an almost savage intensity. One guard, a burly man named Mr. Ramirez, who usually greeted us with a tired smile, was bellowing at the top of his lungs. His voice, strained and hoarse, cut through the din like a knife. Everybody, multi-purpose room now, move, move, move. The scene devolved into utter pandemonium. The dismissive annoyance I'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing dread. This was no drill. This was not thunder. The way Mr. Ramirez's eyes frantically scanned the room, the way his jaw was clenched, the raw fear emanating from him. It was contagious. The kids who had been lining up for their lunch, their trays laden with food, were suddenly being shoved away from the counter, forced to abandon their meals. Burgers, fries, and fruit cups clattered to the floor, forgotten, as they were swept up in the tide of terrified students. The floor quickly became slick with spilled soda and trampled food, a grotesque mosaic of our interrupted normalcy. My friends and I were caught in the crush, a sea of bodies pushing and pulling, all propelled by a single terrifying instinct to escape, to obey, to find safety. The cheerful chatter of moments before was gone, replaced by choked sobs, frantic whisper, and the desperate shuffling of hundreds of sneakers on the hard floor. The multi-purpose room, or MPR as we called it, was a large, nondescript hall used for assemblies and overflow events, located just off the cafeteria. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cattle chute, funneling us into an unknown fate. As we were swept along, I craned my neck, trying to catch a glimpse of what lay outside, beyond the security guards, beyond the cafeteria doors. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Booms, screams, frantic security on the MPR. Was it a fire? A fight, a shooter, the last thought, and a horrifying whisper that felt too real, too close. The rain was still falling, a relentless gray curtain outside, washing the world clean of everything but the escalating terror within the school walls. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, and that whatever it was still out there. We were being herded, like sheep, into what felt like a trap, and the sheer number of us, the frantic, wide-eyed faces of hundreds of kids, only amplified the terrifying question hanging heavy in the air. What the hell is happening? And more chillingly, are we safe in there? The door to the MPR loomed on a dark maw, promising a temporary reprieve, but also an unknowable and claustrophobic prison. The chaos of the cafeteria funneled us, a panicked, surging current of bodies into the multi-purpose room. It was a vast, open space, usually reserved for school assemblies or standardized testing, its high ceilings and polished floors echoing with the frantic shuffling of hundreds of sneakers. The air was thick with the scent of fear now, overriding the lingering smells of lunch. My friend, Emily, gripped my arm, her knuckles white, her eyes darting nervously around the room, mirroring my own burgeoning terror. We were just 2 drops in an ocean of terrified adolescents, pushed forward by a terrifying, invisible force. The most unnerving feature of the MPR was its back wall, a sprawling expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering an unhindered view of the outside world. It was meant to bring in natural light, to connect us with the campus green space. But today, it was a horrifying vulnerability, a transparent barrier between our supposed sanctuary and whatever nightmare lurked beyond. Almost immediately, the security guards and a handful of teachers, their faces grim and set, sprang into action. They didn't bother with the flimsy blinds. Instead, they began yanking down large, heavy curtains, previously rolled up and forgotten, tearing them from their mountings with desperate force. Anything and everything that could obscure the view was pressed into service. Flattened cardboard boxes, old projector screens, even large pieces of art from storage. The rhythmic thud and scrape of these makeshift barriers being slammed against the glass, combined with the frantic whispers of the adults, created a new, chilling soundtrack to our confinement. The room, once brightly lit by the overcast sky, plunged into a dim, claustrophobic twilight. Streaks of gray light still managed to pierce through the gaps, painting distorted shadows across the packed bodies. But the direct view to the outside was gone. We were sealed in, cut off, isolated. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, oppressive silence that followed the initial clamor. Every exit was now manned by an adult, their arms crossed, their gazes hard, effectively transforming the MPR from a communal hall into a high-security holding pen. It wasn't a sense of protection that washed over me, but a profound, chilling realization of being trapped. We were not just safe in here, we were locked inside. The collective energy in the room was a volatile mix of fear, confusion, and a burgeoning impatience. Hundreds of kids, ranging from the wide-eyed 6th graders clinging to each other to the more cynical 8th graders trying to project an air of nonchalance, all buzzed with unspoken questions. Murmurs began to spread. Hushed theories whispered from group to group, none of them comforting. Was it a prank gone wrong? A fight? Another drill that had escalated? My own mind reeled, grasping at any shred of rational explanation. But the frantic urgency of the adults, the cold, hard glint in their eyes, screamed that this was no drill, no ordinary incident. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the weight of unseen danger. Emily, never one to let fear completely paralyze her, eventually broke free from our huddle. Her face was pale, but a spark of defiant curiosity flickered in her eyes. She approached one of the teachers guarding the main entrance, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Davies, who usually taught history. Ms. Davies looked exhausted, her hair slightly disheveled, but her posture remained rigid, a sentinel against the unknown. I watched as Emily spoke in a low voice, her body language tentative, almost apologetic. Ms. Davies leaned in, her response a hushed rumble that was inaudible from where I stood. But I saw the teacher's face, etched with a grim worry, and the way her eyes flickered towards the obscured glass wall. Emily's shoulders slumped slightly as she listened, her hand involuntarily rising to cover her mouth. When Emily returned, her movements were slower, heavier. Her eyes, usually bright with adolescent energy, were now shadowed, haunted. She sank back beside me, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the earlier cafeteria din. You know how there are those houses right in front of the school, across the street. She began, her words laced with an eerie disbelief. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Ms. Davies said there's this man, a crazy man, mentally disturbed. He's barricaded himself in his house, and he's threatening to kill himself. And the cops, if they try to evict him... A cold tendril of dread began to snake through my veins. A crazy man. So close. Just across the street. But then Emily delivered the real gut punch, her voice dropping even lower, trembling. And she said he's been walking around outside the school, watching kids, in a weird way. The words hung in the air, heavy and noxious. Watching kids, in a weird way. The image flashed in my mind, a shadowy figure, lurking at the edge of the school grounds, eyes fixed on the unsuspecting students, like a predator circling its prey. It transformed the generalized fear of a crazy man into a deeply personal, violating terror. It wasn't just a threat to an abstract school safety, it was a direct threat to us. To our bodies, our innocence, our sense of being safe in our own skin. Then came the final crushing blow, a piece of information that solidified the horror and made my stomach churn with a sickening blend of fear and disgust. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes wide and glistening, as if she herself could barely utter the words. And Ms. Davies said, he's a registered sex offender. The confession landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through our small group, quickly spreading to others who overheard. The air in the MPR, already thick with anxiety, suddenly became suffocating, toxic. It wasn't just violence we were facing, it was something far more insidious, far more corrupting. A shiver, colder than any autumn chill, then coursed through me, raising goosebumps on my arms. A registered sex offender watching kids, and this wasn't just an incident, it was a violation, a monstrous intrusion into the sanctity of our childhood. The innocence of the school, of our daily routine, felt utterly shattered. We were not just trapped by circumstance, but by the horrific nature of the threat itself. We were stuck there, in that dimly lit room, for what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps just over an hour, spanning 2 periods of the school day, every minute stretched into an agonizing eternity. Each tiny creak from the hallway, each muffled sound from beyond the covered glass, sending a fresh wave of panic through the room. My mind raced, picturing the man, the house so close, the unsettling image of him watching us. Was he still out there? Was he close? Could he see into the school? Even through the makeshift blinds, the fear was no longer abstract. It was a living, breathing thing, pressing down on every single one of us. We were hundreds of children, vulnerable and helpless, confined in a glass cage, while a registered predator, a mentally disturbed man, roamed just outside our walls, his presence a chilling and undeniable truth. And the worst part, we had no idea if he was still out there, biding his time, or if this terrifying ordeal was truly over. The uncertainty was a torment in itself, a silent promise that the dread, though after what felt like an eternity, but was probably just over an hour, 2 agonizing periods of the school day, a quiet announcement came over the muffled intercom. The situation was resolved. The words were delivered in a flat, almost emotionless tone, utterly devoid of reassurance. It wasn't a cheer that erupted, nor a sigh of relief. Instead, a collective heavy exhalation swept through the multi-purpose room, a sound thick with exhaustion and lingering dread. We weren't released with fanfare, but rather herded, like fragile, traumatized livestock, back into the sterile hallways. The makeshift barriers obscuring the glass wall were slowly, methodically dismantled by the adults, revealing the outside world once more. But the world had changed. The overcast sky still pressed down, the rain still drizzled, but now every shadow seemed deeper. Every movement outside the windows held a sinister potential. The trees, previously just a part of the landscape, now felt like silent, watchful sentinels. The familiar school grounds, once a symbol of safety and routine, now felt tainted, vulnerable, stripped of their innocence. The air, though no longer thick with panic, carried a chilling stillness, an unspoken agreement that something fundamental had been broken. We were escorted back to our classrooms one by one, a teacher at the head and tail of each small group, their eyes constantly scanning the empty corridors. The usual bustling energy of the school was replaced by a somber silence, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of shoes and the occasional hushed whisper. No one dared to laugh, no one dared to run. The heavy doors to each classroom, which had been locked from the inside, were now cautiously unlocked and relocked once we were safely within. But the feeling of safety was a fragile illusion, easily shattered. My own classroom, once a bright space of learning, now felt like a temporary cage. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see a shadow flicker at the frosted glass panel. The bell for the next period rang, but its sound was hollow, meaningless. How could we possibly resume normal lessons after what we had just experienced? The days and weeks that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, rumors, and an underlying current of anxiety that permeated the entire school. The adults tried to project an image of normalcy, but their strained smiles and darting glances betrayed their own lingering fear. Every sudden noise, every unexpected announcement sent a ripple of unease through the student body. We were all survivors of an invisible war, scarred by the knowledge that our sanctuary could be so easily breached. The fact that the man's immediate fate remained ambiguous, whether he was caught, what happened to him, only fueled the collective unease. The lack of closure was a torment in itself, a constant nagging question mark hanging over our heads. It was a few days later when I was talking to Chloe, another friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as the school, that the true, visceral horror of the situation finally solidified, twisting my stomach into a knot of cold dread. Chloe lived in one of those houses directly across the street from the school, the very same cluster that contained the disturbed man's home. She was usually bubbly and cheerful, but now her eyes held a similar haunted look to Emily's, a mirror of the fear we all carried. "You know," Chloe began, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the classroom window. I saw him before, like a long time ago. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? I asked, leaning closer, my heart beginning to thump in irregular rhythm. She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Last Halloween, she finally said. I remember it so clearly because it was so weird. I was looking out my bedroom window, then getting ready to go trick-or-treating, and I saw him. She paused, taking a shaky breath, as if steeling herself for the memory. He was at his window, the one facing our house. And he was cutting his arm with something sharp. I couldn't tell what it was, but I saw the blood. Her voice dropped to a horrifying, near inaudible whisper. And then he used his own blood to write something on the window. Big, messy letters. It said, "Don't come here or I'll kill you." A profound, sickening wave of nausea washed over me. My breath hitched. The image she painted was stark, immediate, terrifyingly real. I could almost see it, the dark, glistening smear of blood, the frantic, jagged lettering, a grotesque warning etched onto the glass. It wasn't just a threat, it was a confession, a glimpse into a mind consumed by a chilling, violent madness. My imagination, once a source of comfort, now conjured the man's twisted face, his eyes glinting in the dim light of his room as he performed this horrific ritual. At the time, Chloe continued, her voice trembling, pulling me back from the terrifying vision. We all just thought it was part of Halloween. You know, a really dark decoration. My parents laughed it off. Said he was just being edgy for the holiday. Everyone in the neighborhood did. Who would have thought? Her voice trailed off, replaced by a shudder. But now, after the lockdown, after knowing he was a mentally disturbed man and a registered sex offender who had been watching kids in a weird way, the truth struck with the force of a hammer blow. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a decoration. None. It was a genuine, terrifying warning. It was a window into the twisted, violent psyche of a man who lived just a stone's throw away from our school, from our homes, from our lives. The horror wasn't just in the lockdown itself, or the threats he made. It was in the chilling realization that the signs had been there all along. Right there, etched in blood on a window pane, a monstrous declaration of intent, dismissed as mere holiday theatrics. That knowledge, that bitter hindsight, was perhaps the most unsettling part of it all. The monster wasn't some unknown entity from a shadowy alley. He was a neighbor. He was a presence in our community, one we had unknowingly, foolishly, disregarded. We had been blind to the darkness lurking in plain sight. And though the lockdown had ended, and the man was presumably dealt with, the school never released official details. Only vague reassurances, the chilling image of those blood-written words, a testament to his escalating madness, became a permanent fixture in my mind. It was a silent, agonizing reminder that true horror isn't always a sudden explosion. Sometimes it's a slow, creeping rot, leaving behind a profound and lingering question. What other dangers, disguised as harmless eccentricities, are we missing right now, waiting just beyond the thin veil of our assumed safety? Story 3. Footsteps in the dark basement at 22, fresh out of college. I'd landed what felt like a dream job, a computer intern at my old high school. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 4 years yearning to escape its walls, only to find myself willingly returning to its very foundations. My office, deep within the school's sprawling, run-off and chaotic basement, was an anomaly, while the rest of the underground space was a dusty labyrinth of old equipment, forgotten files, and storage closets. Our little three-person haven was a slice of unexpected luxury. 3 gleaming, oversized desks, a pair of mini fridges stocked with whatever sugary fuel we needed, a sleek flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, and, most gloriously, ice-cold air conditioning, a privilege denied to the sweltering classrooms and staff offices upstairs. This was our sanctuary, the nerve center where the school's digital heart, its servers and endless tangle of computer hardware, quietly hummed, a constant, reassuring whisper beneath the daily cacophony of adolescent life. I loved it. It wasn't just the creature comforts, it was the people. My 3 old computer science teachers, the very ones who'd helped me land this gig, were less like bosses and more like mentor, even friends. They adored my tech aptitude, and I, in turn, found a genuine camaraderie with them. They were the kind of people who made coming to work feel less like a chore and more like a continuation of a shared passion. In that cool, quiet, subterranean space, I felt safe, valued, and utterly detached from the mundane dramas unfolding on the floors above. It was my calm, predictable world, until it wasn't. A few weeks into the job, my perfectly curated sense of normalcy began to fray, then splinter, and finally shatter. It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe a Wednesday. The days began to blur after that. Mark and Ethan, my 2 office mates, and were upstairs handling some paperwork, leaving me alone in the basement during my lunch break. The silence, usually a comforting blanket, suddenly felt heavy, oppressive, amplified by the gentle hum of the servers. I was unwrapping my sandwich, the mundane aroma of processed turkey and rye bread filling the air. Scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when it buzzed with an incoming call, it was from the front office. I answered, expecting a routine request, a jammed printer, a frozen computer. Instead, a voice, cool and unnervingly detached, sliced through my peaceful reverie. It was Ms. Henderson, the senior administrative assistant, known for her unflappable demeanor. But there was a brittle edge to her usual composure. "Alex," she stated, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "The school is on lockdown. We have an unconfirmed report of an intruder, possibly armed." The words hung in the air, a thick, suffocating fog. My hand, still holding the phone, instinctively tightened, crushing the remnants of my sandwich. Lockdown, intruder, armed. Each word hit me like a physical blow. My mind, trained for logical problems, instantly crashed. This wasn't a drill. The chill that snaked its way up my spine had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was pure, unadulterated fear, a primal terror. What should I do?" I managed to stammer, my throat suddenly dry, my voice barely a whisper. "Turn off all lights and silence your phone and stay out of sight," she instructed, her voice still unnervingly steady, like she was reading from a manual. "Do not open the door for anyone. Do not make any noise. Wait for further instructions. We're trying to reach Mark and Ethan now." The call clicked off, leaving me in the sudden, echoing silence of my sanctuary. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. "Turn off the lights. Hide." My eyes darted around the meticulously organized office. This was my safe space, wasn't it? But then a sickening realization washed over me, cold and sharp. For all its comforts, for all its high-tech equipment, this little office had a critical flaw. It didn't have an actual door, just a wide, open archway leading into the main basement corridor. And the heavy metal door that led into the entire basement, the one designed to keep people out. It didn't even have a working lock. My sanctuary was an illusion, a flimsy facade of safety, completely vulnerable to whatever horror lurked above. Panic, cold and nauseating, began to seize me. My hands started to tremble, and a fine sheen of sweat broke out on my forehead. I flicked off the office lights, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Save for the faint glow of my computer monitor, I quickly shut down the screen, the sudden blackness feeling absolute, suffocating. My phone, a lifeline just moments ago, it felt like a ticking time bomb in my hand. I desperately texted Mark and Ethan, my fingers fumbling, barely able to type coherent words. Locked down, intruder, armed. Are you okay? Where are you? I waited, staring at the blank screen, willing them to reply. No response. The silence in the basement pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. Each tick of the server racks now sounding like a distorted countdown. I was alone, exposed, and utterly helpless. My supposed safe haven transformed into a dark, vulnerable trap, waiting for something unknown to stumble upon it. I sat there in the suffocating darkness of my office, phone clutched in my trembling hand, the screen a black mirror reflecting my own terrified face. 20 minutes. Ms. Henderson had said. 20 minutes of waiting for a call that would tell me it was all clear, that the ghost in the machine had been exorcised, that normalcy could resume. But down here, in the cold, windowless womb of the basement, 20 minutes felt like an eternity stretched thin, each second taut with unspoken dread. The initial shock of Ms. Henderson's call had given way to a chilling cocktail of fear and utter helplessness. I was isolated, cut off from the world above, my only connection to reality a silent, unresponsive phone. My mind, a frantic hamster on a wheel, cycled through every worst-case scenario. Was it a prank, a misunderstanding? My logical brain, usually so adept at dissecting problems, and tried desperately to construct a reassuring narrative, but my primal fear, cold and heavy in my gut, scoffed at such feeble attempts. Intruder. Armed? The words echoed in the silence, shaping the unseen horrors lurking just beyond the threshold of my office. I tried to distract myself, my thumb hovering over the icon of a mindless mobile game. It was a desperate, childish attempt to reclaim some semblance of control, to convince myself that everything was fine, that this was just a temporary inconvenience. But the pixelated characters and vibrant colors felt hollow, meaningless against the backdrop of an invisible, looming threat. Every rustle of my clothes, every involuntary gulp, sounded like a cannon shot in the cavernous quiet. The hum of the servers, once a comforting lullaby, now felt like the low growl of a predator. I was alone, trapped, and the silence which had been my ally for so long had now become my enemy. A vast, oppressive void that could conceal anything. The worst part wasn't the lack of information, it was the absolute sensory deprivation. Upstairs, chaos might be unfolding, screams might be tearing through the hallways. But down here, I heard nothing. The thick concrete walls, designed to protect sensitive equipment, now served as an impenetrable barrier, sealing me in a tomb of ignorance. This isolation, once a luxury, was now a torment. Not knowing was far worse than knowing, even if what I knew was terrible. My imagination, a cruel master, began to fill the void, conjuring images of shadows slithering up and down the main staircase, of metallic glints in the dim light, of the heavy, deliberate steps of a madman searching for anyone. My phone remained stubbornly silent. Mark and Ethan still hadn't replied. I felt a desperate urge to call someone, anyone, to break this agonizing silence. But Ms. Henderson's cold, firm instruction echoed in my head. Do not make any noise. Wait for further instructions. So I waited, suspended in a state of agonizing limbo, every nerve ending screaming, every muscle rigid with tension. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, trying not to disturb the stillness, trying to disappear into the very fabric of the darkness. Then, after what felt like an hour but could have only been a few agonizing minutes, it happened. A sound. Not the distant wail of sirens, not the urgent shout of a police officer, but something far more intimate, far more terrifying. The heavy metal door leading into the entire basement, the one whose lock was broken and groaned. It wasn't a gentle creak, but a protracted, tortured lament, a deep, metallic shriek that tore through the absolute silence, echoing off the concrete walls and reverberating through the very floor beneath me. Each resonant clang, each drawn-out screech seemed to drill directly into my skull, announcing an arrival. My heart, already a frantic drum, now hammered against my ribs with violent intensity. I sat bolt upright in my chair, every muscle tensed, my breath catching in my throat. My ears strained, desperately trying to decipher the lingering echoes. Had someone just walked in? Or had the wind, a trick of the old building, simply played a cruel joke then? The footsteps. They were distinct, heavy, and purposeful, not the light, hurried steps of a student, nor the familiar, lumbering gait of a janitor. These were slower, more deliberate, descending the concrete stairs one by one. Thump, thump, thump. Each landing, each step, felt like a hammer blow against my chest. They weren't running, which was somehow worse. It implied a chilling calm, a grim determination. My mind raced, frantically trying to rationalize. Mark, Ethan. Did they finally come down? But why are they so quiet? Why haven't they called out? A desperate, foolish hope flickered, quickly extinguished by the cold logic of the situation. Ms. Henderson had warned of an intruder, possibly armed. This was not the sound of friendly colleagues. This was the sound of The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing eerily in the confined space of the basement corridor. They were no longer just on the stairs. They were on the basement floor, moving with terrifying certainty towards my section. It's my office, my sanctuary, the space that offered no door, no lock, no true refuge. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized me completely. My chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor as I shoved it back, a sound that felt deafening in the charged silence. I dropped to my hands and knees, scrambling clumsily, desperately, to crawl beneath my large, heavy desk. The space was cramped, dusty, and offered little concealment, but it was all I had. I squeezed myself into the darkest corner, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. My heart was a frantic hummingbird in my chest, a palpable vibration against my ribs. The footsteps stopped. They had reached the entrance to my office. I could feel a presence. I could almost smell it. The air, already thick with the scent of old paper and dust, now felt heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to become nothing, to fade into the shadows. I heard no sound of lights being flicked on, no creak of a chair, no rustle of clothing. Just an absolute, profound, terrifying silence that felt heavier, darker than the darkness itself. Every muscle in my body was screaming in protest, locked in a rigid, agonizing paralysis. I felt a cold sweat prickling my skin, my clothes clinging uncomfortably. I was holding my breath while not daring to inhale, convinced that the slightest sound, whether the faintest whisper of my own existence, would seal my fate. This was it. This was the moment, the end of my story, played out in the claustrophobic confines of a basement office, beneath a desk, in the horrifying silence of an unknown presence. And then, with the sudden, sharp violence of a gunshot in a library, my phone chimed. Ding! The tiny, innocuous sound, amplified 1,000 times by the suffocating silence, tore through the darkness like a scream. My entire world, already teetering on the brink, shriveled up and died in that one horrifying instant. My eyes flew open, wide with terror, clenching my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I had been found. Story 3. Footsteps in the Dark Basement, Part 2. I sat there in the suffocating darkness of my office, phone clutched in my trembling hand. The screen a black mirror reflecting my own terrified face. 20 minutes. Ms. Henderson had said. 20 minutes of waiting for a call that would tell me it was all clear, that the ghost in the machine had been exorcised, that normalcy could resume. But down here, in the cold, windowless womb of the basement, 20 minutes felt like an eternity stretched thin, each second taut with unspoken dread. The initial shock of Ms. Henderson's call had given way to a chilling cocktail of fear and utter helplessness. I was isolated, cut off from the world above. My only connection to reality, a silent, unresponsive phone. My mind, a frantic hamster on a wheel, cycled through every worst-case scenario. Was it a prank? A misunderstanding my logical brain, usually so adept at dissecting problems, tried desperately to construct a reassuring narrative. But my primal fear, cold and heavy in my gut, scoffed at such feeble attempts. Intruder, armed. The words echoed in the silence, shaping the unseen horrors lurking just beyond the threshold of my office. I tried to distract myself, my thumb hovering over the icon of a mindless mobile game. It was a desperate, childish attempt to reclaim some semblance of control, to convince myself that everything was fine, that this was just a temporary inconvenience. But the pixelated characters and vibrant colors felt hollow, meaningless against the backdrop of an invisible, looming threat. Every rustle of my clothes, every involuntary gulp, sounded like a cannon shot in the cavernous quiet. The hum of the servers, once a comforting lullaby, now felt like the low growl of a predator. I was alone, trapped, and the silence, which had been my ally for so long, had now become my enemy. A vast, oppressive void that could conceal anything. The worst part wasn't the lack of information. It was the absolute sensory deprivation. Upstairs, chaos might be unfolding. Screams might be tearing through the hallways. But down here, I heard nothing. The thick concrete walls, designed to protect sensitive equipment, now served as an impenetrable barrier, sealing me in a tomb of ignorance. This isolation, once a luxury, was now a torment. Not knowing was far worse than knowing, even if what I knew was terrible. My imagination, a cruel master, began to fill the void, conjuring images of shadows slithering up and down the main staircase, of metallic glints in the dim light, of the heavy, deliberate steps of a madman searching for anyone. My phone remained stubbornly silent. Mark and Ethan still hadn't replied. I felt a desperate urge to call someone, anyone, and to break this agonizing silence. But Ms. Henderson's cold, firm instruction echoed in my head. Do not make any noise. Wait for further instructions. So I waited, suspended in a state of agonizing limbo, every nerve ending screaming, every muscle rigid with tension. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, trying not to disturb the stillness, trying to disappear into the very fabric of the darkness. Then, after what felt like an hour but could have only been a few agonizing minutes, it happened. A sound, not the distant wail of sirens, not the urgent shout of a police officer, but something far more intimate, far more terrifying. The heavy metal door leading into the entire basement, the one whose lock was broken, groaned. It wasn't a gentle creak, but a protracted, tortured lament, a deep, metallic shriek that tore through the absolute silence, echoing off the concrete walls and reverberating through the very floor beneath me. Each resonant clang, each drawn-out screech seemed to drill directly into my skull, announcing an arrival. My heart, already a frantic drum, now hammered against my ribs with violent intensity. I sat bolt upright in my chair, every muscle tensed, my breath catching in my throat. My ears strained, desperately trying to decipher the lingering echoes. Had someone just walked in, or had the wind, a trick of the old building, simply played a cruel joke? Then, the footsteps, they were distinct, heavy, and purposeful. Not the light, hurried steps of a student, nor the familiar, calmer, lumbering gait of a janitor. These were slower, more deliberate, descending the concrete stairs one by one. Thump, thump, thump. Each landing, each step, felt like a hammer blow against my chest. They weren't running, which was somehow worse. It implied a chilling calm, a grim determination. My mind raced, frantically trying to rationalize. Mark, Ethan. Did they finally come down, but why are they so quiet? Why haven't they called out? A desperate, foolish hope flickered, quickly extinguished by the cold logic of the situation. Ms. Henderson had warned of an intruder, possibly armed. This was not the sound of friendly colleagues. This was the sound of omnita. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing eerily in the confined space of the basement corridor. They were no longer just on the stairs. They were on the basement floor, moving with terrifying certainty towards my section, my office, my sanctuary, the space that offered no door, no lock, no true refuge. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized me completely. My chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor as I shoved it back, a sound that felt deafening in the charged silence. I dropped to my hands and knees, then scrambling clumsily, desperately now to crawl beneath my large, heavy desk. The space was cramped, dusty, and offered little concealment. But it was all I had. I squeezed myself into the darkest corner, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. My heart was a frantic hummingbird in my chest, a palpable vibration against my ribs. The footsteps stopped. They had reached the entrance to my office. I could feel a presence. I could almost smell it, the air, already thick with the scent of old paper and dust, now felt heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to become nothing, to fade into the shadows. I heard no sound of lights being flicked on, no creak of a chair, no rustle of clothing, just an absolute, profound, terrifying silence that felt heavier, darker than the darkness itself. Every muscle in my body was screaming in protest, locked in a rigid, agonizing paralysis. I felt a cold sweat prickling my skin, my clothes clinging uncomfortably. I was holding my breath, not daring to inhale, convinced that the slightest sound, the faintest whisper of my own existence, would seal my fate. This was it. This was the moment, the end of my story, played out in the claustrophobic confines of a basement office, beneath a desk, in the horrifying silence of an unknown presence. And then, with the sudden or sharp violence of a gunshot in a library, my phone chimed. Ding! The tiny, innocuous sound, amplified 1,000 times by the suffocating silence, tore through the darkness like a scream. My entire world, already teetering on the brink, shriveled up and died in that one horrifying instant. My eyes flew open wide with terror, clenching my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I had been found. The ding of my phone was not just a sound. It was the shattering of my carefully constructed invisibility. It was the loud, undeniable declaration of my presence in the suffocating darkness. A beacon for whatever horror lurked just feet away. My entire world, already crumbling, now shriveled up and died in that one horrifying instant. My eyes, which I'd squeezed shut in a desperate plea for oblivion, flew open, wide with sheer terror. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. A guttural growl of pure panic caught in my throat. I had been found. The footsteps, which had been static for an eternity, now moved, slow, deliberate, closer. I could feel the minute shift in the dust-laden air as the presence moved, drawing nearer to my pathetic hiding spot under the desk. Each infinitesimal movement felt like a millennia. Each breath held in my chest burned like acid. My mind screamed a kudu, but no sound escaped my lips. This was it. The culmination of all the dread, all the whispers, all the unknown horrors. I pictured a cold, unfeeling barrel, a flash of light, and then nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. The rigid paralysis snapped. In a sudden, desperate surge of primal instinct, I propelled myself out from under the desk. My chair scraping loudly again, a desperate, guttural sound tearing from my throat. Please don't kill me, I stammered. My voice a broken, barely audible whimper, hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. My eyes, still adjusting to the absolute darkness, could barely make out a towering silhouette. A hand, strong and surprisingly gentle, grabbed my arm, pulling me upright. My heart hammered against my ribs and convinced this was the prelude to the end. But the hand didn't hold me captive, it steadied me. As my eyes struggled to pierce the gloom, and a figure slowly took shape before me. He was a man, average height, dressed in a red plaid button-up shirt, dark jeans, and a reddish-black baseball cap. His features were obscured by the shadow, but his voice, when it came, was calm, almost reassuring, a stark contrast to my own frantic terror. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice low. "I'm just down here hiding with you. What's going on up there?" My mind, still reeling from the sudden shift, struggled to process his words. Hiding with me. The question felt absurd, yet his demeanor was strangely composed. I don't know," I whispered, my voice still trembling. "Miss Henderson from the front office called. Said there was an intruder, possibly armed. I couldn't hear anything from down here. Why are you here?" He seemed to brush off my question, his head turning slightly as if scanning the dark office. "Is there an exit down here?" he asked. his voice now laced with a subtle urgency that hadn't been there before. "Yeah, around that way." I pointed vaguely towards the far end of the basement, my arm still tingling from his touch. Before he could move, a wave of suspicion washed over me. He hadn't answered my question. He wasn't panicked like I was. "Who are you?" I demanded, a newfound edge entering my voice despite my fear. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, a flicker of hesitation. "I was coming to pick up my son," he explained, his voice returning to its calm tone. "A teacher told me to hide when I got inside. Said it wasn't safe." His story sounded plausible enough. A concerned parent, caught in the chaos. Yet, a cold knot of unease tightened in my gut. Why hadn't he called out when he entered the basement? Why the silence then? My eyes drifted to my phone, still clutched in my hand. Its screen now illuminated with a new text message. The one that had made that terrifying ding. It was from Mark. My gaze locked onto the words, each character burning itself into my brain like a brand. "Dude, this is fucking crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Jenkins. He's wearing a red shirt and hat. Whatever you do, don't come upstairs." My breath hitched. The words seemed to stretch, twisting into grotesque shapes on the screen, each one a hammer blow to my fragile sanity. Red shirt and hat. My head snapped up, my eyes wide with a terror that transcended anything I had felt before. I looked at the man in front of me, his figure still partially obscured by the shadows. But enough light from the phone screen caught him. A red plaid button-up shirt, a reddish-black baseball cap. My stomach dropped like a stone, plummeting into a bottomless pit of dread. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. My vision blurred. It wasn't just a random intruder. He wasn't hiding with me. He was the intruder. He was the one who had shot Mr. Jenkins. He was standing right in front of me. The man, sensing the sudden shift in my gaze, the utter horror in my wide, unblinking eyes, seemed to catch on. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a subtle, terrifying hardening of his features. The silence between us, once heavy with my fear, now crackled with a far more potent, deadly understanding. He knew I knew. Panic, raw and absolute, seized control. All rational thought evaporated. There was only one instinct: run. I spun on my heel, a desperate, strangled cry tearing from my throat, and lunged towards the stairs, my legs pumping with a strength I didn't know I possessed. Every fiber of my being screamed for escape. The old, dusty concrete steps seemed to blur beneath my feet as I scrambled upwards, my arms flailing, gasping for breath, for air, for safety. Bang! The sound was a blinding, deafening explosion in the confined space of the basement, tearing through the air like a physical force. It reverberated off the concrete walls, a shockwave that slammed into my back, stealing my breath. I felt the horrifying whiz of something tearing past my ear, followed by a sharp, metallic clink as the bullet ricocheted off a metal pipe or a server rack somewhere in the darkness below. My heart seized, then hammered with a frantic, desperate rhythm. The bullet had missed, by inches. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I continued my mad scramble, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. The top of the stairs burst into view, a sliver of lighter gloom, and I threw myself forward and collapsing onto the tiled floor of the main hallway. Fortunately, mercifully, police officers were waiting, uniformed figures, weapons drawn, shouting commands. They moved in a blur, descending into the basement just as the man, moments behind me, reached the top of the stairs. still holding the gun. He was apprehended the second he opened the door. A sudden, violent struggle, then silence. More good news followed. Our teacher, Mr. Jenkins, had survived the gunshot wound, though his recovery would be long and arduous. It was later determined that the man and Mr. Jenkins had some unexplained beef, a personal vendetta for reasons that were never, ever fully revealed to the public or even the staff. And that was the most chilling part, the lack of closure, the absence of a clear and understandable motive. It wasn't about a grand scheme or a political statement. It was personal, random, and incomprehensible, leaving a gaping wound in the school's sense of safety. The man was taken away, his identity and his twisted reasons fading into a bureaucratic file. But the sound of that gunshot, that terrifying bang in the dark, cavernous basement, will forever echo in my mind. A permanent scar, a chilling reminder that true horror doesn't need monsters or ghosts. It just needs a single, inexplicable act of violence that can shatter a life in an instant, leaving behind only questions and the lingering chill of fear. And that concludes our collection for today. If you have a true, terrifying story of your own, something that happened to you or someone you know, please consider sending it into the email address found in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated, and subscribe if you wish to hear more unsettling tales in the future. Until next time, try not to look too closely into the dark.